Hello and welcome to LegalBytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. We don't give legal advice, but we do talk about how the law works and try to look into our crystal ball to see how things might turn out. If you're enjoying this on YouTube, we'd love it if you could like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends, all the great YouTube-y stuff. And if you want to listen while out and about, we're now offering our live streams in podcast form where you can leave a rating and review. Links are in the description below, as well as to our clips channel where you can find some of the best clips taken from our live streams. Otherwise, if you want to catch me elsewhere, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so on Locals, Patreon, or by becoming a YouTube member, or by buying some really awesome LegalBytes merch. Again, all links are in the description below. And with that said, let's get into it. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to everyone, wherever you are in the world. I know we've got some folks here. We've got someone from Virginia, Annalie Finch. Welcome, welcome. We've got Rena from Sweden. We've got a bunch of people here. We've got another person from Sweden here, Lena Palmquist. So happy to see you guys here. I have my first guest for a while. I've been doing these solo live streams for quite a bit in the last month or so. And I'm very excited about this guest. I know a lot of folks are excited about it too. Once I posted the other day that I was going to have Dr. Kirk Honda on the channel to talk about this subject, a lot of folks were very excited. And so here he is. Dr. Honda, welcome back. Oh, I've got you muted. Sorry. I muted you for a sec. Sorry. So you were here before during the Depp v. Heard trial. So if anybody is not familiar, I had you and Dr. Tracy on, we were talking about borderline personality disorder, PTSD, trauma memories. And that was such a great discussion. So I'm very excited to have you back to talk about this subject. But for anybody that isn't familiar with you, why don't you give your background and what you're all about?
Yeah, I've been a therapist and a professor for 25 years and a podcaster and YouTuber for 14 years.
Nice. That's awesome. Awesome. And so you cover psychology on your channel all the time.
Yeah.
So, awesome. So for this particular conversation, it's where I wanted to talk about the subject of repressed memory and how that compares to situations when folks have been in abusive relationships and they remember the memories, but then only later on realize that the encounters that they had were actually abusive. Things like that. Trauma memories are very, very particular. The context of it is the Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood sort of cluster of cases that have cropped up over the last year or so. There's a number of them where the subject of repressed memories has come up. And so we don't need to get into like the specifics of the cases, but I just wanted to kind of focus on those particular issues within psychology. What are the contexts in which these situations happen for people? And so I guess before we get into it, a disclaimer to folks in the chat and folks in the comment section, if you're watching it on replay, I know that there are people that are keenly interested in this conversation based on when I posted it on social media from both sides of the conversation, right? People that are supportive of Evan Rachel Wood, people that are supportive of Marilyn Manson. And so disagreement is always welcome. Discussion, dialogue, but try to keep it respectful, keep from, any kind of ad hominem attacks, things like that. Mods will be ready to moderate. So basically, so that's with that. Basically, let's see here. What do I have here on my notes? And I can give a little bit of background on the case too. I don't know if you are familiar with these cases. So basically, since 2016, Evan Rachel Wood, she began speaking publicly about domestic violence, saying that she had been abused by two men that she didn't name. It was two different ones. And she was testifying in front of Congress. She was testifying in front of the California State Senate, I believe. And then on February 21st, 2021, she named Brian Warner, professionally known as Marilyn Manson, as one of her abusers, alleging that he abused her physically and emotionally during their romantic relationship, which lasted between 2006 and 2010. And one of the reasons why she was testifying in front of Congress and in front of the California state legislature was because she was advocating for extensions of the statute of limitations for these kinds of cases. Because in California, before it was between 1 to 3 years. Now in California, it has been extended to, I believe, 10 years. And so a number of other accusers that have come out that have been in contact with her had gotten together as a group, and they had conversations together about their experiences with Brian Warner. And a number of them, at least two of them, I think it's two specifically, that have said that they did not bring a case previously because they had memories that were repressed, that were only triggered by these conversations with these other individuals. So what is let's start with, now I've been talking for long enough. What is a repressed memory? I guess we could start there.
Yeah. Well, do you mind if I enter my professor mode and actually
Sure.
give a brief history lesson?
Yes, please
be as
do.
brief as possible.
No, I was a history major. I love history lessons.
Okay. Because it really informs the debate and the controversy today, and has been happening for a long time. So we go back to 130 years ago. Sigmund Freud, in the late 1800s, developed this idea of repression. What he found was, as he was treating people through psychoanalysis, was that many of his patients would remember childhood experiences, abusive, often sexual abuse, that they hadn't remembered previously, or they didn't remember remembering. That's another thing to think about. It's like, how do we remember remembering things? How do you remember you didn't remember it? Anyway, but he would find that people in psychoanalysis would talk about experiences early in their childhood about sexual abuse. And so he developed this theory of repression, and he's the one who coined that term, again, 131 years ago to be specific. And then, and he had two different definitions of it, actually, which is kind of confusing. I don't know if he knew he had two different definitions, but the way he talked about it. One was that it's an actual fully unconscious process, that you go through an experience, a traumatic experience, and your brain takes over unconsciously, represses that memory for you, so to speak, so that you don't have to remember it, so you don't have to be exposed to the trauma. And it protects you from that. But there's all this energy around it. It wants to come out, but it has a hard time without psychoanalysis. And through that coming out, you actually can alleviate symptoms, because a lot of symptoms result as the result of repression. His other definition was regarding what we would call just regular active forgetting, or just normal forgetting. He would use the term repression to refer to, like everyone in your audience, including you, Alita, might be able to relate to. Well, I'll just say for myself, I have a friend from childhood that I lost touch with, and a few years ago, he told me, remember when this happened and that happened and that happened? And I'm like, oh my God, I completely, and they were sort of big events that you'd think I'd remember, but if you had asked me, did these things happen, I would say no, but when he reminded me, suddenly the memories came forward. So Freud also used the term repression for that very common process, whether it's related to trauma or not. So you could call that event that I had with my friend a recovered memory, right?
Okay.
So then we head into the mid 20th century as therapy becomes more prevalent. And there were a lot of weird ideas about repression and hypnosis. It got kind of out of control. But then we come into the 90s, so more recent, when we had a very famous case in California in which there were, long story short, therapists who were over vigilant about and over convinced that child abuse was happening, and satanic ritual abuse was happening all the time. And so there were therapists that were inserting memories into children of sexual, like horrific cult satanic abuse that never happened, but the therapists were inserting it. The therapists thought they were doing a good job, they were doing a good deed and achieving justice by helping, but they were inadvertently coaching the child to actually remember something. And then that led to a whole court case, lasted many years, people were convicted. All that, long story short, was debunked. And so as a result, people in my field were embarrassed because we had people in our field that were believing in pseudoscience and old ideas, frankly, and also we're causing harm. We're not supposed to cause harm, and we're looking at people in our field and we're like, you're causing harm. We need to change. So there was this huge pendulum swing away from anything Freudian and anything repressed memory. And so people started saying repressed memories are ridiculous. Evidence shows da da da. And so there was this huge movement against that. And even kind of a huge movement against memory in general, just like, because there's a lot of research showing that memory has, there's a lot of unreliability about memory. So then these two camps emerged and they would fight with each other because the people who originally were the satanic, there's still people today who hold on to those ideas because, I don't know, it's just an ideology they were indoctrinated into. And then you have this opposing group. And so they're very black and white. But the consensus within science is actually neither. The consensus is that you can insert memories into, and this is a minority group, at least in terms of a voice on the internet. You don't hear from the actual consensus, which is what I come from. You hear from either side, which I'm guessing with the Marilyn Manson case, you're going to hear that. But the consensus within people who actually know the research and the history is that memories can be recovered in the way that I described earlier. You can't, for example, you can go through a traumatic event, particularly when you're young, and, say you're 12, and I won't go into gory details, but let's say you go through a traumatic sexual event. And directly afterwards, you don't feel like you can talk to anyone about it. And so there's no reason to recall it. You don't want to remember it.
Right.
And you don't talk about it with anyone else because no one's there to listen, or you have internalized shame about it, or you have the abuser is saying, if you tell anyone, I'm going to kill you or something. And so the days go by and you're actively not thinking about it. You're not talking about it. 25 years go by. You've never thought about it. You've never talked about it. You've never remembered it. You've never tried to recall it, but it's still there. And if you ask the person 25 years in, did you ever go through something age 12? They'd be like, no, because in the front of their mind, they're like, no, I don't identify as someone like that. I don't remember remembering anything like that. But the more you go into it, they start saying, well, there was this one time, and I never really thought of it. And then they start to tell the story and they're hearing themselves talk about it for the very first time as if they're 12. And they're like, actually, I was totally assaulted, and that happens. Okay. And we would call that repression in the broad sense of repression, a recovered memory. That happens often. Okay. And that's why the statute of limitations legislation is important, because criminals, the person who abused that person at 12 is still at large oftentimes. And if we're interested in actually stopping that, anyway. So that can happen. On the other side, it is true that you can insert memories. Memories can be falsified even by yourself. You can become convinced of things. There are delusional people. I mean, there are QAnon believers, for crying out loud. So it's just like, it's not hard to see that there are people that have extremely odd belief systems that you'll come up to a lie detector test, they believe, the earth is flat. It's just like, they believe. And so it's not hard to imagine that someone could make something up and for a variety of reasons and even kind of believe it, right? And certainly there are people who will make lies up because they're trying to sue for money or get attention or something. That does happen. It's rare. Yeah. But it does happen. So they're both kind of right, but also both kind of wrong is my point.
Okay. Yeah. So and that seems to me about correct, because it just seems to me that I mean, it makes sense, right? It's reasonable to say that someone can have a memory that gets triggered by something. And on the other hand, you can also have a memory that kind of gets created or suggested by someone. Are there certain circumstances that someone could look at as factors to decide between one or the other?
Hmm.
Like what kind of people tend to be falling on one side or another, or age ranges, or anything like that?
Yeah, good. So one way to evaluate, there's a number of different things to look at, and you'll never know. And so here's the other thing I'll say up front is that it's it's anxiety provoking for people to recognize the reality of our brains and memory. That all of our memories, ours, other people's memories, could all be false. Everything we remember, or shall we say, in all likelihood, a lot of things that we remember aren't true. And that's distressing because our identities are often wrapped up in our stories and our memories. And to, ask someone who starts to go through Alzheimer's or early dementia, like how it feels. It doesn't feel good. It's not, it
Right.
doesn't. And so basically, when we acknowledge the reality and the science of neurology in our brains, we're all, in a sense, kind of on the Alzheimer's spectrum, if you will. It's kind of a stupid thing to say, but, we're all dealing with the discomfort of we can't rely on our own brains to tell us the truth, and sometimes we'll be convinced that thing happened and it didn't. And we've done multiple empirical studies, thousands, that demonstrate people will be convinced of something and it actually isn't true. And actually, in your world, there's a lot of science around, witness testimony and all that stuff.
Police lineups. I was just reading an article about the way in which they had to sort of change the way that they do police lineups because of the fact that they had police that were suggesting one person, and then the person who is the witness that picks them out of the lineup, they pick the wrong person, and then that person goes away for 40 years when they had absolutely nothing to do with it. And it was only when they started to introduce DNA evidence. I mean, people that went to jail for rape, for example,
Yeah.
and the real assailant is out there for, with other people.
Right.
um so yeah, I'm very familiar that memory is kind of a tricky sort of thing. So and especially when it comes to, I mean, and this is why, like, when it comes to litigation, trials, having witnesses on, that's why we like to, well, number one, that's why we have a statute of limitations. It's one of the reasons why we have a statute of limitations, is because over time memories fade and they can get influenced by other experiences. And then, another reason, another issue with memory is that, that's also why we have corroboration of witnesses as well, right? Like, it helps that there's a document that confirms, yes, this happened on this date, or this particular detail. So when I think you said earlier that having someone sort of implant a memory is much more rare, it sounds like. How, like, what are the factors, or I don't know if it's more rare or not, but like, what are the factors for a memory to be implanted, like, that would be present in a situation like that? Like, what I really want to get at is basically, like, how can we end up sort of telling the difference between situations? I mean, it's tricky, I'm sure,
Mhm.
because we're talking about the human brain, but
Mhm.
are there ways to be able to sort of differentiate between these?
Yeah. So, to be precise, research shows that something like 5 or so% of people who come forward with allegations officially have been found to have been false. So it's rare, but not like 1%. It's like 1 in 20-ish of the people who come forward have been found. Now, that research is hard to apply to everyday situations because those are particular kinds of allegations. But anyway, so that's the idea is that most of the time, the vast majority of the time, people, when they come forward, are telling the truth, and that's what we found. But in terms of, and the other thing I'll say is that when we watch a case like Johnny Depp, Amber Heard trial, or Marilyn Manson, Evan Rachel Wood, a lot of the events that happened, there is no possibility of corroborating evidence because it was just two people in a room, and the nature of the allegations are such that there isn't going to necessarily be any physical evidence, and so for us as viewers, we have to recognize the fact that in all likelihood, as long as they stick to their stories, we'll never know. There's a possibility that they could both be lying, or one is telling the truth. And the broader context for that is, it doesn't mean that we discount other people who have been abused. I think people will latch on to one of the figures in these cases and think that if that person wins, it validates their own story and their own trauma. And
Yeah.
that is a dangerous connection, because who knows what's going to happen in the legal system and in the public opinion. But whatever you went through, and that's legit. And you don't need some silly news story to justify that. And you can find people, therapists in particular, who will absolutely support you and believe you, So there's that. But in terms of looking for evidence as to, if someone is telling the truth or not, a number of different things to look at. One is do they have a history of having other false memories that are obvious? Do they have other kinds of thought disorders? Have they sorry, what was the question again?
How can we, like, what are some ways that we can differentiate between someone who is having or describing a repressed memory versus someone who has maybe a false memory that has been somehow implanted? I guess we can look at it from multiple perspectives. From the perspective of the individual, is there a subjective difference to them that they can eventually detect if it's a false memory, or
No, that's
wow.
memories are such. Every time we remember something, we are reconstructing it. So
Yeah.
by its nature, every time any of us tell a story, it's not, there's no source material, right? There's no
Mhm.
original document in our brain. Every time the document is being reconstructed and changed slightly,
Yeah.
depending. So other kinds of things to look for are, that I would look for. And again, it's, if you're on a jury or you're trying to figure out who's telling the truth, it'd be really hard to know, because, but anyway,
Yeah.
but if I were just personally trying to find out, I would ask the person what was the process of the memory, and when did it emerge? So if they said, I had no memory of it at all, I thought everything was fine, then I went to this therapist, and she helped me through hypnosis, had all these things emerge for me. That would raise a number of red flags. It wouldn't mean that it wasn't
Hmm.
true, but that storyline would tell me, well, there are many cases that start that way that end up being demonstrated to be false memories and implantation. And then if I did hear that, I would say, what's the track record of that therapist? Because some therapists, they have an ideology that's pretty obvious when you look at
Okay.
the kinds of clients they work with and the things that they say.
Okay.
So that's one thing I would look at. Another thing I would look at is, did they tell anyone close to them? Because oftentimes they will tell someone and then they might even kind of forget it for a while, or they don't. I mean, is that the claim with Evan Rachel Wood, that she didn't remember it at all?
Not for her, but there are multiple statements about repressed memories in the Phoenix Rising documentary, where she talks about her experiences with Marilyn Manson. One of the things is that she says that she and her then partner Illma Gore, I guess they basically were saying that um, their understanding seemed to be that people can have repressed memories for 7 to 10 years. And then there are two women who have filed claims against Marilyn Manson, one of which was actually, I think they both were dismissed um, because of statute of limitations issues. And that was one of the things that they tried to argue, was that their memories were repressed until they had conversations with other women who had also had relationships with him, and that they were triggered and realized, suddenly had these memories again.
Mm. Yeah, so I guess I'd be really curious as to how that emerged for them. If they said something like, um, if you would have asked me prior to having that realization if anything bad happened, I would have said 100% no. That would be like, well, so you didn't detect anything harmful about the relationship. Whereas if they said something, well, yeah, I told my friends after breaking up, like he's got some issues. He's a dark dude. Like he's got a lot of anger, and he was kind of scary sometimes. Some indication of, because that will happen. We understand this. This is empirically true as well. That for many people, if not most, they will go through a intimate partner aggressive experience and don't frame it as abusive. They will often blame themselves, particularly if they went through that when they were younger and it was perhaps worse than when they were younger, and this is actually not as bad. And they're like, well, this is just normal men or something. And then when it comes out later that, well, actually that's not okay, that they're like, oh well, I guess I just never really thought about it that way. And then that starts to cascade into, well, then this happened. And you'll hear that all the time. It's not
Mhm.
covered memory, so to speak. It's just a reframing or an allowance for people to recognize that they were actually being abused.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me that that seems to be a sort of a different bucket. That's at least how I've thought of it as it's from my understanding from what I've sort of been researching is that it's actually relatively common that people that have been through DV or IPV sort of experiences that they a lot of times have not necessarily realized that what they went through was abusive until they later sort of put those pieces together, like I said, reframing it. Or in my mind I was thinking of it as like a recharacterization
Mhm.
as not normal to abusive. So would you say then that those kinds of conversations are more likely to bring about, or is there a comparison that can be drawn of like whether conversations like that with people that had been through similar experiences, would those be more likely to bring about um those sort of like recharacterizations or reframings of those sort of experiences, or could those have brought about repressed memories that they just had completely forgotten?
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak from my own personal experience. When I have a client that has not talked about their childhood or about these kinds of events, and this happens often, honestly. I mean, I would say the vast majority of people who go through abuse don't like to think about it. They
Mhm.
also have reasons to deny that it even happened or to put themselves down, to blame themselves, the gaslighting process, ongoing gaslighting process. So it's more often the case that the person doesn't sit down on my couch and say, like, I was abused growing up and let me tell you stories. It's usually like I'm depressed or I have a drinking problem or my relationships are going in the tubes. And then over time, I start to hear hints of things. But because I know about the science and I know about the risks of introducing certain ideas, I'm really careful about how I interview someone. So I wouldn't say something like, "Well, it sounds like you were abused." And I will say that there are a lot of therapists that are like that. They see abuse everywhere. I don't know, they have a bone to pick or whatever, and that can happen. So the when I train people, when I detect that in someone, I really try to ease them out of it because it can be kind of a quagmire to some extent. But anyway, so when I'm interviewing someone, I have to be careful. So I might say something like, "Well, so tell me more about your childhood," and then we do that for a while, and then I say like, "What did it feel like when that happened?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know, it felt really bad, but childhood stuff." And I'd be like, "So if someone else told you that story, how would you feel about it?" So it's a lot of open-ended questions.
Mhm.
I don't say you were abused. Having said that, there are times when I might say that, but only after I'm 100% certain that that word applies. They have all the details, they just can't put that word to it. So that's what I would do, and that would be one of the things I would want to know from those who came forward. Like, how did the memory exactly emerge?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I should say is that it's been alleged by Marilyn Manson in his so there are several lawsuits that have been filed against Marilyn Manson, and he has one that's filed against Evan Rachel Wood and Illma Gore, her on and off partner afterwards. Um, and it alleges defamation and it alleges intentional infliction of emotional distress. And part of it is that he alleges that there is a conspiracy that they decided to put together to reach out to um to reach out to a bunch of women that used to be partners with him or had encounters with him, and to try to basically come up with this conspiracy for everybody to make these allegations against him, and that they are, I mean, from his perspective, they are false allegations. So that's what he's alleging in his complaint. And one of the things that he has attached as an exhibit, and I totally should have prepared with this one to show you. I can actually, and I can see if I can pull it up as I'm not very good at multitasking while I'm talking. But if I can pull it up here, I can show you what it looks like. But there is allegedly a checklist that Evan Rachel Wood and Illma Gore provided to the women ahead of the meeting or at the meeting at some point, and basically to say, did you, okay, here we go. I can share my screen. Oh, good. I managed to do it. Like, did you experience XYZ? And I'll show you what this looks like. Okay, so this is an exhibit to his complaint here. So it's basically like a form that was allegedly created for this purpose. They've got the name, contact information, whether they're willing to testify, and then whether they were a sexual partner, spouse, staff, and or band member. And then it has like this checklist of items going down from blood, drinking, rape, being tied up or bound, scarification, being threatened, a number of things like that. And that's the bottom of the form. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that detail influences your line of thinking on this kind of situation or what.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first reaction is not likely. I mean, if someone sent me this questionnaire about a past partner, even if it was fairly fraught with conflict, tied up or bound, that's pretty specific. Blood drinking, these are pretty specific things that if you didn't remember something along those lines, in fact, of the insertion of memory techniques, this would be the worst technique you could possibly use, because there's no unless they sent this and said something like, we could make billions of dollars, or I'll come after you if you don't fill this out the way that I hope you will. Like, I don't know. But even then, it would be hard to do. Could someone lie? Yeah. I mean, could there be a conspiracy? Yeah. But the data shows that, especially when you start to increase the accusers, the chance that they're all lying is very, very small. Could they be? Yeah, 100%. But the chance is pretty low. And a major factor is the consequences for coming forward are so high. The damage to one's life and career and mental health for you to come forward is very high. It's so much more safer and to some extent better for you, given the way society reacts, to stay silent. Now, again, could someone push past that and see dollar signs and create a conspiracy? Yeah, but I don't know anything about this case. But
yeah.
So
no, that's
how many
that's
people?
fair.
How many people filled this out in the affirmative on these details?
I don't know exactly how many, but I think so. I watched the documentary yesterday, and it looked like there was about a half a dozen women that were on camera. And Evan Rachel Wood, in one of her filings in this case, I think said that not everyone that participated in the meeting was on camera, because not everyone wanted to be on camera. And then also that not everyone that they reached out to participated, which is also confirmed by the other side, because Marilyn Manson has also provided a declaration from a woman who says that she was approached by Illma Gore to participate in it. So yeah, it is a very, very sort of fraught situation, right? Because it's, on the one hand, it could be a conspiracy. On the other hand, it could be a group of women who all recognize that they had sort of bad experiences that were particularly fraught and wanted to seek support with one another before coming forward against someone that they viewed as very powerful and very influential, and doing something that is very scary for someone who is a DV survivor, which is to name an abuser. It's there. I can see a scenario in which both of these possibilities exist.
Mhm. And we might not
So
ever have resolution on that ambiguity because it'll be people's word and memory against someone else's word and memory.
yeah, yeah. Aside from, I guess, specific, you know, instances in which particular things get corroborated. I mean, there in this particular case, there are other aspects as well that there's also been a Marilyn Manson has also provided a copy of a document that is a purported letter from the FBI talking about an investigation of a well-known influential, you know, person that is, it seems by implication it was supposed to be about Marilyn Manson. But if you look at it, looking at it as a litigator, I'm like, there's no FBI header on there. There are some typos on here. It looks pretty immediately like not exactly real.
Mm.
And so this was also, you know, one of the things that sort of calls into question some of the things here. But, you know, there could be aspects of it that are true and aspects of it that are not true. And like you said, where you have a situation where you have only two individuals in one room, it's one person's word against the other. So, and I think that something to note is that um, this is such an interesting discussion. One thing to note is that your sort of like your world versus my world, is that, you know, yours is much less about, you know, getting to, I don't know, or maybe I don't, maybe I shouldn't go that far as to
No,
say, is
yeah,
like
go that
yours is
far. My rule is not about getting at the truth. It's not.
okay. Okay, yeah, yeah, because it's just about helping a person and you know, helping them navigate the rest of their life based on the things that they have gone through. But, you know, in mine, it's less about that, and it's more about like, is it this side or this side? You know, like which one is correct? And so trying to get through likelihoods, statistics, data, you know, on these kinds of things to sort of see, like, does that help inform this conversation to figure out which way is up and which way is down?
Mhm.
But this is, I mean, this is it's just it's very fascinating.
Yeah.
So have you worked with anyone that has had like false memories implanted or anything like that? Like, have you worked with, or on the flip side, with, I mean, you've mentioned having patients with like repressed memories that sort of got teased out over time. But I guess on the false memories issue, like, have you encountered anyone sort of dealing with that sort of a situation, or if you can,
Well, on a
if
less
you would have been able to detect it?
well, there's an easy way to detect in couples therapy when two people will recall a conflict they had the night before, and they have completely different memories of what happened, and
Mm,
that's the wonderful training experience that couples therapists will go through because it informs my work with individuals. Because when my individuals tell me a story about their conflict with their spouse the previous night, I have the knowledge of, well, it's your memory and your story. I'm not going to, laugh in their face and say like, I don't believe anything you say, but in the back of my mind, I'm always like, well, who knows what really happened? But it doesn't really matter what really happened. It matters like what. Well, sometimes it does kind of matter what really happened. Anyway, point is that in terms of false memories, it's constant. You know, I guarantee you, for you, Alita, and for me, and everyone listening, every spousal relationship conflict they've got in is rife with false memory. So, so
yeah,
yeah, I've dealt with.
probably right.
Yeah, I mean, people will literally say, "You said you wanted to divorce me last night," and the other person will say, "Like, I never said that. You're an idiot." And it's just, and they're totally convinced, and it's like, well, one of
Yeah,
them has a false memory, or both. I don't know. So,
yeah.
so it happens all day, every day, and especially when we're going through an emotional experience. You know,
Mhm.
could Marilyn Manson have done some of these things and literally not remember it because he doesn't want to acknowledge that he did these things? Yeah. Could the victims have exaggerated or had the memories implanted for some sort of, it's hard to imagine that, but it's possible. Um, I would say it's more likely, given the details that I've heard, that if it didn't happen, it would literally be people lying to try to get something. But because for
Hmm.
these people to have, unless there's a central therapist, which if we heard that that when I went to this therapist, suddenly I remembered Marilyn Manson did this, then I'd be like, oh, okay, there's a red flag. But um, but yeah, in terms of like recalled or repressed memories, recovered memories about childhood abuse, I mean, certainly I've had cases where the patient will have a notion about it. That's always the case when I'm working with people. It's never just like all of a sudden the memory is just there, and it's certainly not through. I don't use hypnosis. There's a lot of pseudoscience around hypnosis. So, but many times I've had a client who will come in with various different trauma symptoms, and I'll wonder. It's like, wow, it sounds like something happened, but they're not disclosing that. I might even ask. They're like, no, nothing really happened. And I'll say like, well, like let me give you a fictional like likely kind of story. I'll have a guy and he will be suffering dissociation, complex PTSD, depression, anxiety, alcohol abuse, this kind of thing, relationship problems, and we're working on those things. Talking about today and symptoms and how to navigate his life, and then I'm always just thinking like it sounds like something happened. I ask him like, what were your parents like? And they're like, well, my dad was pretty stern. My mom was pretty passive, and my parents, they got a divorce when I was 7, and so yeah. But nothing really bad happened. And then I'm like, okay. And I, usually believe people. I don't usually just think, oh, something's going on. But then I start hearing more and more, and I hear little stories, little hints about something. Well, my dad, you know, I kind of have a temper like my dad. I'm like, okay, hear that, and then go down the road a little further. Again, this could be years of therapy, and then at some point, I'm just like, so, really tell me what it was like when you were 6. What do you remember from that time? That takes a while. That takes a while. And again, I'm not inserting anything. And then they might say like, well, I guess when you ask me these questions, it sort of, I don't usually think about it, but my dad was, I think he was angry all the time. I think he was like in a bad mood, and my mom says things sometimes that kind of indicate that. And I guess when I think about it, I do have this distinct kind of memory of when he would walk in the door coming home from work. I remember like running to my room, I think, and playing with my stuffed animals. And to
Hmm.
this day, like when my partner comes home from work, like I have this weird kind of anxiety. And again, this is 3 years of even just getting to know your emotions, right? Because you have
Yeah.
to start to, a lot of people cut themselves off from their bodies and their emotions. So then they're like, you know what? And maybe 5 more years later, they're like, I don't really know what happened when I was 6, but I'm pretty certain that my dad was emotionally abusive through his anger. And I don't have, I have sort of glimpses of memories, and then we conclude collaboratively that they were emotionally abused. Would we go to court over that? No. And I wouldn't sign a document saying you were abused to go to court. I would never do that, even if they asked me to do that, because it's not scientific. It's just a conceptualization that helps them to recover so that they can actually become less depressed, less anxious, not use substances. That's the goal. And that's a very common story. Is that a recovered memory? Was that repressed? You could say that.
Mm, mm. Okay. So is it I mean, it sounds then like you would be you would have fewer red flags about it by it happening, this memory sort of being recovered outside of a clinical setting, right? Like as opposed to being, on the therapist couch with a therapist, if they were with a friend and talking about things, or with someone else, with a group of folks,
Mhm.
even, it seems like that makes you less
It depends.
suspicious.
It depends. I mean, yes, in general, but it depends on the therapist, right? If
Mm,
I heard that the therapist did what I did, then I wouldn't be skeptical. But if I
that
heard
makes sense.
of a therapist that is known for pushing repressed memory ideas, then I would be very
Yeah.
skeptical.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so, okay. So how about would now we haven't really talked about it much in this conversation, but before we have talked about PTSD. How can that factor in on memories? Does PTSD have a way of or is a symptom of PTSD to block out memories like that, or is that common? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's central to the disorder that the individual will avoid actively remembering it in their own mind, and also any triggers that will provoke the memory from emerging. It's a central feature of PTSD.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Um, so that answers that. And then also there is a question of, I mean, I feel like I probably know basically the answer to this, but how do drugs and alcohol impact somebody's memories either? I mean, I would imagine like my just thinking about it logically, I would imagine that both the perception in the moment of, being under the influence during an encounter obviously is going to impact somebody's memory, but I wonder if also use over time also will impact memory
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Basically.
yeah.
um that
And
pretty
and I
much
suppose in the reverse, that if you were intoxicated and your memories are a little gray to begin with and jumbled, it might make it easier to insert memories for yourself, or to have them inserted because you don't really have a firm grasp on what really happened to begin with.
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Um okay, let's get a few super chats because we got some while we were discussing. So I think we've got perhaps some comments and some questions. Secret McSquirrel says, "Oh, Dr. Honda needs more volume." Yeah, I did. I was upping your volume during the during our
I'll speak very
conversation.
close to the microphone. How about that?
Sorry about that. I should have. I was sort of managing and trying to balance yours and mine at the same time. 2012 Jameson says that umbrella guy has a bombshell new video. Okay, interesting. 2012 Jameson also says the hardest part is that with repressed memories, it's hard to back up because evidence degraded over time. Well, that's true too. I mean, that's the other reason for statute, or not the other reason, but another reason for a statute of limitations is that over time you have evidence that starts to disappear, and so it gets harder to corroborate those memories that could be fading as well.
Yeah, I mean, along
Um,
those lines, what we need to do is reduce stigma for victims and create more systems that are conducive to victims coming forward. It'll take a long time. It's a whole cultural shift around sex negativity and victim blaming and rape culture and other kinds of issues that, if we work on that, then people, the analogy I always give is, if someone mugs you or someone breaks into your car, you don't you immediately tell everyone you know, because it's like, oh my god, my car was broken into, or oh my god, I got mugged the other day.
yeah,
You just tell everyone. You tell people at work, you tell your family, you post it on Facebook. There's no worries about it because we don't have a stigma about being mugged. We do
right,
have stigma about being the victim of sexual assault and intimate
yeah,
partner violence, and that's why people don't come forward. And so it's our fault that people don't come forward until 10, 20 years later.
yeah, yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, because it's a lot of times, or I mean, one could even say most of the time, that people will have questions about like, well, what happened leading up to that? What did you do?
Right.
What were,
What are you wearing?
what sort of situation? Yeah, what were you wearing? That's one, but like, what sort of risky behavior were you engaging in that brought that evil onto you?
Yeah.
um so yeah, no, I definitely agree on that one. Next super chat. Model City Plus is OMG. Once again, the Dr. Honda and LegalBytes combo have been watching Kirk's content since 2020 and cannot imagine a day without his content anymore. Oh,
Oh,
awesome. Love it. Wonderful. And 2012 Jameson says a courtroom and a therapist couch are and should be treated differently. Yep, true. Also, people are different level is susceptibility to be implanted.
Mhm.
Um, Sure. Yeah. I mean, have you? do you know of any sort of like, I kind of asked about that earlier a little bit, but what sort of are there any sort of tendencies for types of people that have memories more easily implanted?
Yeah, a lot of research on this. Children, for example, are more susceptible, particularly pre-7, pre-5. It's actually pretty easy to insert a memory into a 3-year-old. And so there's that. There's also personality traits, being dependent, having been traumatized yourself, having been gaslit previously because you don't trust your mind,
Okay.
being a part of an oppressed group because you're used to other people defining what your life is and what's in your own mind. Yeah, I don't know, I don't remember all the research off the top of my head, but yeah, there's certain groups of people, certain types of
Okay.
individuals who are susceptible to implanting memories.
So if someone had been abused in childhood, for example, that could be someone who would be possibly more susceptible then to a false memory.
Yeah, ironically. Yeah.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah.
Um, okay. 2012 Jameson also says the brain fills in gaps. A witness can see a person clearly, even if it is pitch black. Why? Because they imprinted who they thought did it. There was actually, I do remember, um, I used to watch Oprah's daytime show when she had it when I was back in high school. It was like one of my regular shows that I watched, and I remember that there was a woman on there who talked about how she had been raped by a man, and she went through the whole process of picking him out, testifying, saying she knew exactly what he looked like, knew exactly who he was. She had nightmares, like even when he was in jail, she had nightmares of this man's face, of like crawling into her bedroom every single night. And then this was one of those cases where the DNA results were taken at one point, and it turns out it was some other man entirely. And so I remember when Oprah asked her, whose face do you see now? Because you know what the other man looks like. And so she said, I actually now see no one, which is the most beautiful thing, that like I don't see any face on any kind of memory on that now that I know that this man who I've been picturing almost every single night for like a decade or something like that. And she and the man like were like talking, like he came on then, and they were talking about how they had actually become friends through like the whole like through the whole situation. So it was like a silver lining, I guess. But other than the fact that he lost much of his life to being falsely imprisoned. So I mean, a very serious case, but it is very interesting how that memory changed for her, that she said that she's like, I no longer see any face, not even the man that I know who did it. So
Yeah.
very
I
interesting.
thought you were going to say she still sees the guy she thought, even though she cognitively knows it's not him, because that wouldn't be uncommon either.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that's not him because of the DNA evidence, but I still see him because I repeatedly remembered him. In my brain, I have his brain associated with that event, even though that's not true.
I would imagine that would also be reasonable, because if that's been sort of reinforced over time on a regular basis,
Yeah.
it seems like that would be possible too.
Yeah, a common experience along these lines is you have a bad dream about someone and you wake up in the morning, you're like, "Oh, it was a dream." And then you're in a bad mood towards that person. Uh,
Yeah.
and you just have this feeling like you should apologize, but you're like, "Oh, wait, it didn't really happen." So consciously knowing something and actually knowing something is a different thing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Makes sense. Um so Hayden says Ashley Walters mentions having repressed only some of her memories. So Ashley Walters was a personal assistant for Marilyn Manson for a period of time. And so she has a case that was hers was one of the cases that was recently dismissed, and I think that she has appealed it. I don't know the status of that one because I haven't focused in on that one just yet. But she is one of the people that has said that she sorry about that. Dogs and
Dog,
cats living together.
zoomies all of a sudden. Yeah.
Yes. Caught a glimpse of one of the cats. They're all fine. But anyway, so she says that she's repressed some of her memories, but
Mm.
it seems that some of her others have not.
Yeah. So if there
I
was
mean, is that
corroborating,
common?
yeah. So if there's corroborating evidence, like she told a therapist or a friend some of the events that happened and did remember those things, but then because of PTSD or whatever, just didn't want to remember it and didn't actively try to uh, gather all the different memories in one's conscious mind. Once that happens, maybe 10, 20 years later, when you have the safety to do so, or the society changes so that you feel like, well, maybe I can actually start to come forward with this. And you start to, you gather the conscious memories that you have readily available, and you start to really think about it and catalog it, maybe write it down. You're like, well, then this happened, and that happens all the time with traumas. That's actually a hallmark of trauma, is that, for example, when I work on trauma recovery, and it's fairly complicated. There's a lot of different caveats that I could go into. I won't bore people with. But when we get to the telling of the story, of the narrative, I actually will write down everything that they're telling me as a part of the treatment. And I get out a piece of paper and I physically write it down. The first time they tell me the story, I always leave like 2 or 3, maybe 4 lines in between each sentence, because I know the next time they tell, there's going to be another detail in between those that will be deeper. And then the next time they tell a story, they'll be like, oh, yeah, you know what? Now I remember this was there. Yeah, I totally forgot that. And then I fill that in, because when we remember things, other associations come forward. We can never know if all of the details are accurate, but in all likelihood, most of them are. And if Ashley Walters has a progression like that, and evidence to support that early she did have at least the topic sentences of the memories and had stated such, then that lends itself to that. And again, I would stay away from the word repression, because other people would interpret that as no memory at all, and then all of a sudden you go to a therapist and you're hypnotized, and boom, all this stuff comes out. It would
Suddenly,
just
all
be
the
like,
details there.
yeah, I remembered a lot of it, but as I really thought about it, some other details came forward, which happens to all of us, right?
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Okay, let's see here. Tracy Fagan says, "What if they are presented a checklist?" We talked about that. 2012 Jameson says, "Talk to Tug about Vic and Pretty Little Liars." I will have to do that. Manson Casey says, "I'm not sure if it matters, but I believe they all claim PTSD." Yeah, we talked about that. Strawberry Angel says, "I have always remembered everything. Nothing was told to me." So I presume that this is talking about abuse in their past. Uncivil Law says, "Hey, you, did you remember to subscribe? Do it now." Thanks, Uncivil Law. I appreciate that. And Scott Cardinal says, investigative historian, thanks for the super chat, man. Happy to see you here. Says, dangerous question to answer, but do you have any thoughts about Mia Farrow's daughter's allegations of being molested during breakup with Woody? So it's obviously a bit of a different topic than the Manson and Wood case, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on it, and I have just watched a few documentaries and heard both of their accounts, and others around. That more recent documentary had a lot of interviews with Mia Farrow and other people that were present and could witness at least some of the story that her daughter was. Her name's, is it Ronan or anyway?
Or Rowan or Ronan?
I forget, but
Yeah.
so I could insert a memory. We'll just say it's Ronan. Just joking. But I remember concluding again. I don't know, because it's a lot of one person's word against another, but the likelihood. So that's what it is. Like in quantum physics, it's the electron isn't in one spot. There's a likelihood it'll be in a spot. And so when it comes to this sort of thing, that's how I approach it. There's no way to know. I would say it's likely that the daughter is telling the truth, given one, the story, the corroborating evidence, the way Woody Allen behaves in various different ways, and given her PTSD has always been, and she's always been consistent with the story since she was young. It wasn't a recovered memory. She's been trying to, get the story out for a long time. So is it possible she's lying? Yeah. Is it possible that she has false memories? Absolutely. But it didn't seem likely to me, but I don't know.
Okay. Interesting. Uncivil Law says also, I have all kinds of suppressed memories about Alita, which are just now coming to light. So very many. LOL. Thank you, Kurt. I really appreciate that. Good friend right there. But thanks for the super chat and for your sense of humor. So that for me that's the last super chat. So I have no other questions for now, but I really appreciate this conversation. This is like perfect timing. So I appreciate you having you here. You're
Can I
getting
ask
your
you a
thoughts.
question about the case about
Sure.
Marilyn Manson? Rachel, is it going to court sometime soon, or why is everyone talking about it right now?
It is. Well, there are a couple cases that were filed in 2021 against Manson that are still in active litigation. There's at least one that's still in active litigation, and that's the one that was filed by the actress Esme Bianco against him. And then he also filed his case just in March 2022. So it was like it sort of, one of the reasons why it sort of has really garnered a lot of attention was that he filed it just before the Depp v. Heard trial, and then his name came up so many times during the Depp v. Heard trial. So I think the confluence of those two, and the fact that the cases on their basic facts feel kind of similar, where you've got, a woman who accuses a man and then he sues her, for one claim or another afterwards. So yeah, that's one of those. But it's relatively early on in this case, which is why I haven't come to any concrete conclusions. I have certain suspicions about different aspects, and then other things that I just am not really sure one way or another how to think or how to believe about it. I mean, one of the issues was this repressed memory issue, and it seems like it's still very, very complex as to, and difficult to figure out how someone, whether someone has a repressed memory or a false memory that has somehow been implanted or suggested, or, one way or another, been sort of falsified, or if someone's just outright lying.
When
So
will
I
it go
mean,
to court? Is there any idea when it'll go to court?
I mean, in California, I typically the default is courts like to at least first schedule the case to be 1 year out from the filing, and then if it's a complex case, they'll extend it out further. But here, I mean, it's going to be beyond next March. I don't anticipate this case going to trial before summer 2023, just because we're still in. I mean, I think things have been backed up quite a bit since the pandemic anyway, since I was last litigating in Los Angeles as well. So I think that things are more backed up than I even remember them being when I was working there. So it's probably going to be quite a while. They haven't even gotten into the discovery phase just yet, because they are, Evan Rachel Wood and Illma Gore, they're trying to get at least portions of his complaint dismissed. So, and that's kind of like one of the fights that's going on right now, is he's trying to get permission from the court to have some limited discovery so that he can get some evidence from them to respond to their motions to try to get stuff dismissed. And so anyway, so it's still like, in terms of like responses in the litigation, it's still very, very early. Even though it was filed back in March, and it's already, I mean, we're in mid-August now.
Will it be
So
televised?
yeah. We don't know yet. The tendency for LA courts, especially civil courts, is not to televise. And I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe because they know that, I don't know, that cases like this will have a lot of interest. I'm not sure. But it is a case in state court as opposed to federal court. So those are more likely to be televised than federal cases. But I don't know. We probably won't know if it'll be televised until like right before they go to trial, honestly, when the
So
judge
where do you
basically
land?
decides.
Where do you land right now? Do you want to commit to that?
I think so. I'm very interested in this case. I've gone through I've done live streams on going through all of the filings so far. And so I'm interested in sort of going through every sort of controversy that comes up in it. And sort of the decisions that are put in front of the judge, and the things that they're sort of going through as the case progresses. So I'm very curious about it. So yeah.
Okay.
But as far as one side or another, I don't know. I don't know. As each issue gets presented, I go through that one and I make a determination as to what I think about that specific issue. But so far the case in general, I don't know. But if it does go to trial, probably. I mean, if it's televised, I'm almost definitely going to be live streaming it because it's very interesting to me.
Hmm.
So, and we actually did get a few more super chats here. Let me just go through those. Tracy Fagan says, "What if you are ashamed of what you consented? Can your mind turn it into abuse?"
Yeah, not likely, but absolutely. There are rare cases where that's found to be likely the case, but yeah, that could happen.
Yeah. Sandy Ramirez says, "Thoughts on someone who previously lived an alternative lifestyle and years later are convinced that it is abuse."
Yeah, I mean, it it, it would be hard to know from someone's allegations solely. You would have to hear a lot of stories about how the story emerged, but yeah, someone could, particularly if they were susceptible to thoughts being altered. Some people are more susceptible to that. If there are, motivated reasoning to frame it as such. But yeah, I mean, I could see someone going through, like, they choose to go through an S&M relationship, for example, and they, it was consensual, it was, volitional, and then afterwards, uh, again, hypothetically, let's say their relationship didn't go well, and
Mhm.
they were dumped, and it was very hurtful to them, and they had a lot of grief and pain around it. Maybe they have a lot of relational traumas prior to that, and as the time goes on, over the next few years, they're in a lot of pain, and that's factual. They're in a lot of pain about the breakup. They're just, oh, it just hurts. They start to look for ways to frame their pain, and they're like, I must have been abused. Yeah, you know what? I never did really consent. They start to selective remember, and then they frame it as they were actually being abused. That does happen. It's rare, but it absolutely can happen.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. And then one last one here. Move Your Hoop says, "Question: Could Illma Gore and Evan Rachel Wood telling others about underage girl in the video who died?" So one of the defamation aspect of this case is that um, Marilyn Manson alleges that Illma Gore told multiple people that a an actress who was in one of his a film that he wanted to create that never actually got published called Groupie, that the actress uh, was both underage and died um, during the filming. I don't know if she died during the filming, but that she is no longer living now. But that during the filming she was underage, and the implication of it is that he was having a relationship with a woman who was underage at the time. So anyway, so that's the defamation piece of this case. But so could them telling about an underage girl in the video who died, plus the FBI investigating, plus victims are in danger, induce memories? Could all of these? I guess the question is, could the possibility of these two individuals telling these other women all of these different things ahead of time of these meetings with these women, could those have influenced their memories of these events?
Yeah, if it was something like prior to these disclosures, their story was, yeah, Marilyn Manson, he's got a temper, but he wasn't abusive. And then after this, they're like, well, I guess he was kind of abusive. He did scare me sometimes, or he did swear, and I was kind of scared of him. Well, what kind of stories? Well, the stories I told you earlier, but they're just kind of framed differently now. Like that one time when he picked up the chair and threw it across the room. Like before, I didn't really see it as abuse, but when I look back, maybe it was when I kind of, okay, if I heard that, then that sounds believable. But if they said, I had no memory of the blood stuff and the knife stuff and the hitting me and the sleep deprivation and the systematic abuse, I had no memory of that. Then I hear this and I have all these memories of that. Then that sounds suspicious, right?
Okay.
So that's why I think it's important to really hear from how the victims came to these realizations. Just sort of labeling them as like, well, because I think a common narrative is like, so they didn't have any memories of this for 10 years and all of a sudden they just have memories. Like, how is that possible? It's probably not that is the thing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fantastic point. And that's one of the reasons why I've been trying to sort of like pick apart, like, how can we figure this out?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. Tracy Fagan says, I go back to why not file criminal charges, innocent until proven guilty. I mean, I think it gets back to what you were saying before about, there are a lot of reasons why someone might not even want to talk about it, even with people that they are close to, because of shame, because of, the brain wanting to protect itself from bad memories and things like that. I don't know if you have more thoughts on that.
I mean, I don't want to, 1,000 times more about this than I do, but the threshold for conviction of a criminal charge is much higher than in a civil case. So, like with the O.J. Simpson case, he was proven not guilty, right, in criminal, but in the civil case, he was found to be liable, right? And how many people believe that O.J. Simpson is innocent, right? But criminally, he was innocent. So, which is it? There's nuance there for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then sometimes, you'll have a case where, somebody files a report with the police, they investigate, they do their due diligence, and then the prosecutor decides this is not the kind of case that I think can be won, even if I think that this is probably what happened. This is what the evidence is laying out to be that would be put in front of a jury. I don't want to bring this case for that reason. So there's more of, that as well. But thank you, Tracy Fagan. Okay. Well, I think with that, I think that probably about ends it. I don't want to hold you for too long, because I know you've been here for over an hour now. But anyway, this has been such a great discussion, and I would love to have you back again to talk about more psychology, whether it's on this case or on another case, more questions and stuff that come up. So
sure,
thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And so, guys, if you aren't already familiar, he is tagged in the title and in the description below, Psychology in Seattle. I also posted on all the social media sites and tagged him in there as well. So you can go and check him out everywhere else. And thank you to everybody in the chat for a great discussion. Thank you to everybody that super chatted, that just regular chatted. And thank you to the mods. I think pretty much Secret McSquirrel, I think is our main mod today. And thank you so much for marshaling good conversation in the chat as always. So if you guys enjoyed it, do hit the like button. It does help to sort of push this video out. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and subscribe to Psychology in Seattle for more psych stuff like this.
Yeah. And sorry for the volume thing.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry too. I should have been more active, and like maybe mentioning it to you, that would have helped. But alrighty. Okay. Thanks, guys. I will see you guys in the next video.